Hello everyone, and welcome to Critic Picks with Alex Udvary. I am your host, Alex Udvary. Before we get to today's podcast, please remember to subscribe to this channel on YouTube. Click on the bell to receive notification of new videos, and remember to like this video. Also, send me a friend request on Facebook. The link is provided in the description. And check out my blog where you will find 10 years of written reviews and all of my published work at alex-udvary.blogspot.com. This week, I will be taking a look at the art house movie scene in Chicago, reviewing a new Western, Two Planes and a Fancy, opening at Facets. At the Music Box Theater, a new 4K print of Dario Argento's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage will be screened for midnight showings over the weekend. Finally, tomorrow, Friday, April 26th, Turner Classic Movies will have a Wheeler and Woolsey marathon airing 9 of the Comedy Teens movies. I will discuss who they are and why you should tune in. And now we turn to Two Planes and a Fancy. You know, the American Western, it typically deals with masculinity, heroism, family, tradition. Two Planes and a Fancy doesn't address any of these themes in its attempt to become an almost anti-Western. Set in 1893, we follow 3 travelers: Ozana, a French geologist; Alta, an American reformed con artist; and Milton, a painter, who travel to Colorado looking for a hot spring spa. Now, there isn't much else in terms of narrative, as the movie is more interested in making a commentary, I think, on our notions of the Western. If the intention of Two Planes and a Fancy, directed by Whitney Horn and Lev Coleman, was to de-romanticize the American Western, it succeeds. However, it also succeeds at being uninteresting, purposely lacking the beauty and the grandeur of a John Ford Western, as well as a central conflict. Two Planes and a Fancy is neo-realist in its approach, using what seems to be natural lighting, real locations, and dialogue focused on mysticism and one very long sequence about rock formation. The anti-Western, or sometimes called the revisionist Western, dates back to the 1960s and focused on morally questionable characters choosing not to see the world in a black or white, good versus evil. Instead, it established an anti-hero. Think of Clint Eastwood in the Man with No Name trilogy. One of my favorite examples of this subgenre is Robert Altman's 1976 Buffalo Bill and the Indians, which tackles similar themes Two Planes and a Fancy is trying to hit on, mostly exposing the myth of the American West. But Altman's movie was cynical, comparing the Old West to Hollywood. Two Planes and a Fancy isn't as assertive in declaring its intent and the message it hopes to leave the audience with. Here's a speech I suspect may hold a deeper meaning into the movie.
You were just at the Chicago World's Fair, yes? Did you see the Eskimo Pavilion by Mr. Franz Boas?
No, I don't know who that is.
But I think he's an important geologist. He's German. I saw him give the most wonderful talk in New York City, all about Eskimos and Indians.
Oh, that's a geographer.
Oh, well, so this Mr. Boas, He goes on long journeys to the Northwest Territories, Canada, and he stays with different tribes and learns their languages, and he collects their lore. And they have these marvelous tales. Their religion, really, is all these stories about nature and animals and the way things have become, which is very different than saying the way things have always been. So they might have a story about, and I might be getting some of this wrong, the otter people.
Ooh, go on.
So when you hear that, you think, oh, the otter people. Yeah, that must be a tribe like the crow or the bear. So one day, these otter people are walking around and they just get very hot. And they can't cool down and it's just awful. So they strip down and they get into this pool of black mud and they just roll all around in it. And when they emerge, the sun bakes the mud onto their skin. And that's how the otter people became otters. I think there's so much wisdom in that. Because it reflects how all of life is about transformation. And how energies all around us drive those transformations. Just because you're born a human doesn't mean you might not become an otter or a rabbit or a mushroom. Anyhow, that is not what Mr. Boas was saying. His point was that other geographers and, the common public hear that story and they think, oh, those are just stupid Indians and they don't know about science. And when they saw an otter, they just naturally came up with that story and it satisfied their curiosity, and that's been the story ever since creation. But what he discovered is that those stories have histories, and they've traveled from tribe to tribe. And as they've traveled, they've transformed. And that's the flow of wisdom. Oh, and he says, when you look at a civilization as it is right now, you don't see the depth of possibility that's behind it, which is why he's measuring skulls. You see, Mr. Boas and his men have been measuring the skulls of thousands of kinds of people to learn more about brain capacity. And this idea that one race is more capable of intelligence than the others, there's scanty evidence to prove that. Oh, and he says when other scientists are studying Indians, they usually start with some laws of psychology and then they try to fit the Indians to those laws. But he says we should just approach each new tribe, one by one, as if there are no laws, as if we know nothing. See, with Indians, if we look at them through European eyes, we miss so much. We are bound by our preconceived ideas and expectations, and if we want to learn anything from the Indians, we have to let those go. We need to strip away our presumption of superiority, because our knowledge is just so scanty. We have to open our minds.
Now, listening to the character speak about collecting lore and stories being transformed and the general public's preconceived notions about things and learning to strip away our presumptions, it may speak to our preconceived notions about the Old West. But my question is, what about it? So what if our notions aren't correct? Then what is the truth? Two Planes and a Fancy doesn't seem as intellectually thought-provoking as the filmmakers had envisioned. I have watched this movie twice, trying to meet it halfway. And I understand there is something more than meets the eye here, but the movie lingers and prattles. Whatever the ultimate message is, it's too subtle for an audience to fully grasp and take notice. Now, if you're really interested in seeing anti-westerns, I would say better examples of this, besides Altman's Buffalo Bill and the Indians, is actually another Robert Altman movie from 1971, McCabe and Miss Miller. And there was 1970's Little Big Man, directed by Arthur Penn, starring Dustin Hoffman. So out of a possible 4 stars, Two Planes and a Fancy gets 1.5. For showtimes and to buy tickets, Visit Facets website at www.facets.org/cinematech.